Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another spectacular show for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Niall, this has felt like a very long week. Not a bad week, not good or bad. Some good things, maybe some bad things from your perspective, but a long week nonetheless.
Enormous numbers of things to talk about. The week beginning with the inauguration and plenty more following after that. Yeah. So out of this cornucopia of topics, Robby, what is your radar on today?
Happy to tell you, Niall, let's get right to it. So people keep asking me why all of these tech bros, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and others, are joining with Trump, or at least softening their opposition to him. Big picture, here's the answer. About a week ago, 4 days before Donald Trump's second presidential inauguration, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, another important tech figure, one we've talked about a little bit less on the show, but a very important one nonetheless, he shared on X a threatening letter that he had received recently from Senators Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bennet, Democrats. In the letter, the senators expressed dismay that the tech entrepreneur had donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. They write, "We are concerned that your company and other big tech donors are using your massive contributions to the inaugural fund to cozy up to the incoming Trump administration in an effort to avoid scrutiny, limit regulation, and buy favor," they wrote. These donations raise questions about corruption and the influence of corporate money on the Trump administration, and Congress and the public demand answers. In response, Altman noted that the donation was actually a personal contribution, not one made by his company. He also could not resist pointing out the hypocrisy. He wrote, "Funny, they never sent me one of these letters for contributing to Democrats." Now, Altman may very well be correct about that, although actually supporting the Democratic Party financially, rhetorically, otherwise, has given the tech leaders very little actual protection from Democratic lawmakers. Just ask Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, who were repeatedly dragged before Congress, you remember, and accused of conspiring to overturn democracy, abusing children, committing all sorts of other sins by people who have no idea how tech works. By criticizing Trump's views on immigration and otherwise touting liberal causes, Zuckerberg and Dorsey thought they had successfully ingratiated themselves with the Biden administration. Yet, in July 2021, President Joe Biden accused Facebook specifically of killing people because Zuckerberg had not unilaterally put the government in charge of content moderation. And that, in a nutshell, is why so many of the wealthiest and most influential innovators in the tech sector are abandoning the Democratic Party en masse. Some, such as venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, Tesla CEO Elon Musk, and PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel, have been full MAGA for a while. Others, such as Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, are now officially seeking political neutrality while dipping their toes in Trump-friendly waters. But there's one thing they all have in common, and that's the dawning realization that the political project of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is to bring technological innovation to a grinding halt. Yes, many Republicans, too many in my opinion, have also railed against tech in recent years, betraying their previous support for free market principles in order to exact revenge on social media platforms that limited conservative speech. But the plain truth is that the GOP's desire to break up large, profitable, and successful tech companies is really about score settling, frankly. Political figures such as Trump and Senator Ted Cruz were against big tech because big tech was against them. This does not make the Republican attacks on tech defensible. Indeed, they directed their fire in entirely the wrong direction. It's the main reason that social media deplatformed conservative speech was federal pressure. But the progressive war on big tech is very, very different. Warren, Senator Bernie Sanders, and their allies are not narrowly anti-tech because tech is mean to them. Their ideologies are opposed to the kind of economic power that accrues to successful technological ventures. Moreover, social media companies have learned that no amount of capitulation to government dictates will ever be enough for the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and so on. There will always be another hit piece in a mainstream media outlet about the failures of Facebook, X, Snapchat, Google, TikTok, or someone else to counter foreign disinformation, right-wing propaganda, hate speech, etc. There will always be another congressional inquiry and a proposal to remove Section 230, the liability shield for internet companies. There will always be the threat of antitrust legislation aimed at the sheer bigness of these companies. Even though polls consistently show the American public broadly like and appreciate the services the tech companies render. They're more popular than Congress is. For the past several years, Democrats have attracted some conservative support for the anti-tech agenda. The populist faction of Trump's Republican Party has noisily embraced antitrust and even the elimination of Section 230, which would make social media impossible. But Trump no longer seems particularly committed to their agenda. He has empowered Musk. He's working with TikTok to thwart Biden's ban. He has even made peace with Mark Zuckerberg, it seems. They dined at Mar-a-Lago. Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, TikTok CEO Shou Zi Chew all attended Trump's inauguration. The end result may well be a GOP that is more comfortable with tech and markets. That would be a good thing for economic growth, for the unfettered innovation that we need to make America, again, the greatest country in the world. Perhaps libertarians should send a cheeky thank you note to Elizabeth Warren for helping bring this about. So that's my take on why. I was like, why are the tech bros throwing in with Trump? Well, I think they realize they have no choice because the Democrats want to regulate them out of existence.
So here's where I am slightly perplexed by the internal logic of your argument. Your argument is, well, the tech bros are now going over to the Republican side, and that's fine. But your argument is also that when they gave money to the Democrats, they didn't get anything for it.
Yes.
That's a good thing, surely. It is a good thing that the Democrats were not bought by the tech money that was funded to them and still took action that they presumably believed to be correct and justified to curb the power of tech.
No, I don't agree that the actions taken were good.
But they resisted the financial incentive.
You ideologically, that's the thing you care about, is that the influence from the companies does not influence the government policy.
Yes.
That's not what I care about. What I care about is just the policies of the government.
But
and the policies of the government toward tech under democratic governance, I think, will destroy the tech sector and make us not competitive on a global scale.
I understand that, but you're also saying that it is fine if, as I understand it at least, you're saying that if tech companies or tech bros give large sums of money to the Republican Party and that buys Republican acquiescence in what the tech companies want, that's A-OK.
It depends what the thing is. If that's buying them more regulation of other firms, or the government deciding which firm is going to be big and beneficial hands-on regulation, then I'm against it. If it's buying okay, now we're going to leave you alone, and we're going to leave the whole marketplace alone, and we'll see which firms prevail, and the regulations will be minimal and non-invasive, then I'm for it.
But
because I just care about what the regulation is itself.
Yeah, but I don't think, I guess I don't think that you can separate out the people who are making the regulation from the question of whether those people are being influenced by the money that they are receiving. And so if they are being influenced by the money that they are receiving, it inevitably corrupts the political process then.
I don't think, honestly, Trump is all that influenced by the money he's received. I think he's more influenced by a lack of combativeness on the part of their public statements and the way they've made the platforms. But look, there was a lot of hostility to conservative speech on the platforms, and now they're saying we're not going to do that anymore, and Republicans are saying, okay, then we're going to leave you alone. That's what we wanted to do in the first place, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I am highly dubious of that logic. I'm also highly dubious of Sam Altman saying, oh, it was a personal donation, not a corporate one, so that should be fine.
Well, I mean it is legal, right? I mean, it is.
Influence. It's legal, yeah, absolutely. I mean, but we complain about lots of things that are sure. Legal. I mean, the argument is, does money have a corrupting influence on the system? And I say yes, and that should be curbed, and you're like, I don't really care.
But you don't. This comes to a fundamental philosophical difference in us. The part I recoil in horror at is a prominent member of Congress, Senator Elizabeth Warren, sending a threatening letter about how I'm going to investigate, hamstring, look into your business because you made a political donation to someone I don't like. Like, that is what horrifies me the most. And this is part and parcel for democratic governance. There have been letters sent from Democratic members of Congress to all sorts of cable companies for having Newsmax or Fox on their platform saying that you're contributing to hate speech and disinformation, and should you have, like, those are the things that bother. Again, what bothers me, you're bothered by the private influence on the government. I'm bothered by the government, which ultimately has the actual power of law to levy fines, to jail people, to shut people down, to break them up. Them attacking the private people. That's
but
what
I mean, if
worries
they're
me.
attacking the private people at the behest of other people who are giving them money, that is a problem. Or if people who would otherwise be investigated are not investigated because they're financial benefactors, I think that's a problem. Yeah. Anyway, we have a fundamental difference.
We'll leave it there. Lots more to get into today, including two guests who will give you kind of dueling and different perspectives on the immigration argument as we enter the next Trump administration. Stay tuned. President Donald Trump sat down with Fox News host Sean Hannity on Wednesday for his first major television network interview since he was reelected. The two discussed a wide range of topics, including executive orders, immigration, the California wildfires. Trump also touched on the pardon, specifically for former President Biden's decision not to pardon himself. Let's watch a bit of that.
This guy went around giving everybody pardons. And you know, the funny thing, maybe the sad thing, is he didn't give himself a pardon. And if you look at it, it all had to do with him.
Trump went on to say that Biden must have gotten bad advice from his advisors not to pardon himself.
On Monday, shortly after being sworn in, the president also pardoned people who took part in the January the 6th riots 4 years ago. You will recall that hundreds stormed the Capitol building as lawmakers tried to certify the 2020 election. Despite vowing at one point to only pardon non-violent offenders, Trump in fact pardoned roughly 1,500 people, including those who had in fact been convicted of violent offences. In a small number of other cases, Trump commuted sentences. During the interview, Trump defended the rioters. Take a listen.
These people have served horribly a long time. It would be very, very cumbersome to go and look. You know how many people we're talking about? 1,500 people. Almost all of them should not have been, this should not have happened. And the other thing is this, some of those people with the police, true, but they were very minor incidents, okay? You know, they get built up by a couple of fake guys that are on CNN all the time.
Nobody watches.
They were very minor incidents.
Let's circle back to J6. Biden, he didn't pardon himself. Right. He pardoned many other members of his family and a lot of political figures and that kind of thing. I don't know that the idea of pardoning himself, did that occur to him? I don't know.
I don't know, and I also thought that in that interview, Trump made sort of very vague claims about Biden himself. He said something to the effect of the money went to him, which, I mean, I don't know if that's a reference to the whole 10% for the big guy kind of quote that was alluded to. There was obviously no substantiated clear evidence that would have seemed to require a pardon for Joe Biden himself. I assume Trump is doing it to try to sort of pump out a kind of smoke suggesting guilt where that is at least not borne out by the evidence thus far. I don't know why Biden would pardon himself.
Yeah, I don't either. Of course, I don't know why he would pardon all the members of his family. That did not seem like a good idea. And we've now thrown open the door, certainly, you know, if he's escalated the preemptive pardoning situation, Trump might very well be the first person to pardon himself before he leaves in 4 years, or just every Republican or everyone in Washington, D.C. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, later in the show, I think we're getting to an interview a Democratic strategist gave where he talked about the dangers of giving those pardons to Biden's family and the idea that those set a bad precedent and are generally a bad look. And as you know, I agree with that. I didn't think he should have pardoned Hunter Biden. I didn't think he should have given those last-minute pardons to other members of his family either.
Something we do not agree is on the January 6th situation. So some of them were commutations. It was commutations for the kinds of people who got extremely long sentences for seditious conspiracy, Enrique Tarrio and other leaders of the Proud Boys. I have said that is actually the part of this I agree with probably most heartily because, as I argued earlier on the show, I do think those sentences were just absurdly long. The government had sought 40 years in those cases, and the judge gave them 20. There was both a trial penalty, which is, and this is not unique to the Enrique Tarrio situation. This is just something in the criminal justice system that bothers me, that if you don't take a plea, so the mandatory sentences are so long and so aggressive, and I think you agree with this on some level, that people can't, there's pressure to take a plea deal, and in the vast majority of criminal cases, there is a agreement with the plea deal and it never actually goes to the jury. If you fight for your you're innocent. If you actually argue your innocence, you pay a trial penalty, and you have mandatory sentencing, and they throw the book at you, and you get these just outrageous sentences. I think 20 years for what actually happened was insane, and so I'm fine to have these excessively long sentences reigned at. Look, I think you should rot in prison for 20 years if you committed like murder, like mass murder, not for, help. The theory was helping to organize this, right? He wasn't even there on that day, but I think you disagree.
I disagree, certainly in the case of Enrique Tarrio, who'd been ordered to leave the District of Columbia, partly because he was under scrutiny by law enforcement for messaging chats where he and his allies had been talking about, in one instance, talking about a revolution seizing crucial buildings, and certainly Enrique Tarrio on public social media, having been involved in the pre-January the 6th organisation, was certainly celebrating it while it was going on, and was a key figure. But my bigger point in today's discussion is the description by the President of the United States of what happened on January the 6th has been mostly very minor incidents. People can look at the footage. It's unfortunate we don't have the footage here right now, but 170 people pleaded guilty to assaulting or obstructing law enforcement. 140 law enforcement. Oh, we do have some of the video here now, where we can actually see some of the things that occurred. And various people have been convicted of extremely violent activities. No, hold on. So, for example, one of the police officers on duty was Daniel Fanoon, who testified how he was dragged from a line of officers and into the crowd. I heard someone scream, "I got one." They seized ammunition that was secured to my body. They began to beat me with their fists and what felt like hard metal objects. There were other figures like, let's say, Mr. David Dempsey, who was described as by prosecutors as one of the most violent rioters. He was, according to evidence, climbed over fellow rioters, quote, like human scaffolding, and used, quote, his hands, feet, flagpoles, crutches, pepper spray, broken pieces of furniture, and anything else he could get his hands on as weapons against officers. Look at the footage that is playing there. That is not a very minor incident.
Of the about 1,500 people, my understanding is that 2/3 were charged with totally nonviolent offenses. So it's a much smaller number of people who are charged with violent offenses. Do I think they should have had their convictions totally wiped away? No. Now, many of these people have already served some amount of time in prison, so the penalty has been paid, and of course they all lost their jobs and their livelihoods and all of that. So there has been
not
punishment.
been paid by those who we saw being released just in the past couple of days. The penalty has been lifted by the President of the United States for participating in a violent attempt to overthrow an election.
You can't give them back the time they had already spent in prison.
No, but the point is they would have spent more time in prison were it not for Trump's intervention.
Right. Well, yes. That's where we disagree, because I don't need people to spend 10 or 20 years in prison for most of the kind of actions I saw. Now, it should have been case by case, because maybe there are instances where I would look at that and go a longer prison sentence was needed, but no one was murdered by the protesters, and so...
Does it not give you any pause at all for a President of the United States to describe widespread assaults on law enforcement as very minor incidents?
I would not characterize them as very minor instances, but I would also not characterize them as an organized plot to occupy or overthrow the government, just as the crazy, deranged leftist kids who occupy buildings in Colombia or whatever. I don't think they're terrorists. I don't think they even need to go to prison at all. Maybe they got to get academic suspension or something, but it's not like just being in the building is not...
It's, this is just a sort of diversionary tactic, I think, to dilute the significance of what happened on January the 6th. And we have been through it and we have argued about it quite vigorously before. It was an attempt to thwart the certification of the election, to keep the loser of that election in power. As I say, 170 people pleading guilty to assaulting or obstructing law enforcement officers. Those people should serve the time that was rightly given to them.
More Rising right after this.
Thank
tension between two increasingly Trump-friendly tech titans is brewing and has been for a while. Elon Musk and OpenAI's Sam Altman got into a fight on X, a back and forth over Operation Stargate.
Operation Stargate is an up to $5 billion AI infrastructure partnership that Trump, along with Altman, SoftBank's Masayoshi Son, and Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison, announced on Tuesday.
Musk took a shot at Altman over the project, responding to an OpenAI tweet by writing this: "They don't actually have the money." In another tweet he wrote, "SoftBank has well under $10 billion secured. I have that on good authority."
Sam Altman hit back, writing, "Wrong, as you surely know. Want to come visit the first site already underway? This is great for the country. I realize what is great for the country isn't always optimal for your companies, but in your new role, I hope you'll mostly put America first." White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt undermined Musk's comments this morning.
Here she is.
Well, President Trump is very excited about this infrastructure announcement in the field of AI, which is obviously growing and something the United States of America needs to capitalize on because our adversaries, such as China, are very advanced in this field. And so that was a big announcement for our country, for our industries here at home, and also for the American people, because this is going to create a minimum of 100,000 jobs here in the United States of America. So the American people should take President Trump and those CEOs' words for it. These investments are coming to our great country, and American jobs are coming along with them.
Meanwhile, Ellison's comments during Tuesday's presser have enraged some on X.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the most exciting things we're working on, again, using the tools that Sam and Masa are providing, is a cancer vaccine. It's very interesting. It turns out, I'll be quick, all of our cancers, cancer tumors, little fragments of those tumors float around in your blood. So you can do early cancer detection. If you can do using AI, you can do early cancer detection with a blood test. And using AI to look at the blood test, you can find the cancers that are actually seriously threatening the person. Then beyond that, once we gene sequence that cancer tumor, you can then vaccinate the person, design a vaccine for every individual person to vaccinate them against that cancer. And you can make that vaccine, that mRNA vaccine, you can make that robotically, again using AI, in about 48 hours. So imagine early cancer detection, the development of a cancer vaccine for your particular cancer aimed at you, and have that vaccine available in 48 hours. This is the promise of AI and the promise of the future.
In response to Ellison's comments, podcaster and journalist Drew Hernandez wrote on X, "President Trump needs to reject this mRNA nonsense. All of these psychos that want to play God need to be booted."
Internet personality Ian Carroll wrote, "It's make America healthy again, not America all get AI scanned and mRNA experimented on again. Larry Ellison is CIA. This is atrocious, has no place in this administration. Terminate everything about it right now."
A resurfaced clip of Ellison talking about AI police body cams is also gaining traction.
Remember this terrible case in Memphis where the 5 police officers basically beat to death a citizen in Memphis? Well, that can't happen because it would be on TV at headquarters. Everyone would see it. Your body cams will be transmitting that. The police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. And it's unimpeachable. The cars have cameras on them. I think we have a squad car here someplace. But those kind of applications using AI, if we can use AI, and we're using AI to monitor the video. So if that altercation that occurred in Memphis, the chief of police would be immediately notified. It's not people that are looking at those cameras.
So lots to discuss here. The idea of AI using mRNA technology to target cancer early on. That will probably sound appealing to some people, very scary to other people, due to widespread suspicion about mRNA vaccines among some vaccine skeptical quarters. I have no idea to independently verify how much scientific validity is behind the I don't know if he's just giving a pitch meeting type thing for a product. I just have to rely on what people I do generally tend to trust say. Vinay Prasad is one of them. I've liked a lot of what he's had to say about COVID. He's not an anti-vax person whatsoever. He says, I'm just reading his Substack, he says it's not going to happen. Artificial intelligence and mRNA vaccines are not going to cure cancer. AI is not going to be able to detect the right type of lesions early. mRNA cancer vaccines are going to fail. The modern melanoma vaccine trial has so much likely informative censoring. Wait for phase 3. So he was sounding a pessimistic note about that. Now, I hope companies do these kinds of projects and find strategies to deploy new technology to make us healthier and better off. It should always be voluntary. I don't know if the anti or vaccine skeptical people are saying, it's human experimentation. Well, if people consent to try these, I'm a right to try person. If people want to try out these things, that's fine. It's none of my business or the government's. It just shouldn't be forced on anyone. And then the question of how much of it involves government spending is, of course, a public policy question, and I totally understand with it and put myself in the camp of people who don't want a lot of government spending put toward private business experimental ends. But I generally do want to unleash tech companies to explore things like this if they so choose.
Yes, that is true. I was about to leap in to defend Larry Ellison over the charge of CIA involvement, but I see that Gizmodo previously reported that the fact that Oracle takes its name from a 1977 CIA project code name, and the CIA was Oracle's first customer. So,
now you're putting on your tinfoil hat with the rest of us, Niall. Join the party, Niall. It's all CIA spooks all the way down.
I'm sure Larry Ellison would still object to the fact that we described as CIA. And look, the mRNA stuff I'm not going to get into because that's something that obsesses people, and unless you're at a similar level of obsessiveness, it's very difficult to have those debates. Obviously, people's personal rights should be respected, and people should not be conscripted for medical experiments. I think that is a pretty universal belief. What interests me about the Musk versus Altman thing is that it gets back to what we've talked about before in terms of different people's influence on the current administration. And Elon Musk had, in fact, originally been one of the very early investors into OpenAI,
yes,
and had been on the board at one stage.
Yeah, they've had a professional rivalry, right, business rivalry for a long time. They're a kind of modern day Edison versus Tesla sort of thing. They both want to have AI be the thing that they innovate in, and which I think is fine. I think it's good for businessmen to be competing to deliver a better product. They should not be competing in a way that, like, I'm going to get the ear of Trump or the government, so we punish your company so mine wins. That I don't want to see, and that is the area of concerns about Elon that I do share with you. Like, if Elon is more in charge in the government and gets some punitive regulation that hurts OpenAI or his rival's company, that I would be totally against. We just want them, free to compete in the open field. The thing about Sam Altman I always find interesting is that he's trying to create AI technology. His name, Altman.
As you say, that we'll need to get the tinfoil hat on about that, Robby. Is he a clone?
Have you heard that phenomenon where people, like, if your last name is Judge, you're likely to be in the legal profession? If you're likely that there's that kind of
When I was
appeal?
At college, we were very excited to find, decades before, a president of the junior college common room who was called Reverend Church, who we liked. So, that's
there you go.
Your name is shows a predisposition. The Altman thing, Altman himself is obviously suggesting that Musk is influenced, saying that it's not. He would hope that he would be concerned about things that were best for the country rather than his companies.
I agree with that. Larry Ellison, say what you will about him, does look good for 80, I would say. Amazing. More coming up on Rising. Stay tuned.
President Trump could be reviving a controversial policy from his first term, the Muslim ban. On day one of his second term, Trump signed an executive order titled Protecting the United States from Foreign Terrorists and Other National Security and Public Safety Threats. According to legal scholar Maryam Jamshidi, not only does it mirror the first Trump ban on Muslims, but this one is worse.
This new order not only lays the groundwork for a Muslim ban to be reinstated, but it offers an even wider scope through which to deny visas to people if they, quote, bear hostile attitudes toward its citizens, culture, government, institutions, or founding principles. And it removes individuals who have already entered the country. Here to discuss this renewed effort is Maryam Jamshidi, a resident fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome to Rising.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I guess to start with, there are probably a number of people, perhaps they're watching, who would say, well, why shouldn't we, the government, take action to make sure people who are hostile to the American citizens or its institutions be not enter the country in the first place, or not be here at all? I think that's something some people would say we ought to be doing.
Well, I mean, if we think back to the inspiration for this ban, which was the first, second, third, and fourth iterations of the Muslim ban under the first Trump administration. I mean, we know it was quite clear that the motivation there was discriminatory. Trump made that very clear. Legal experts were clear about that as well. The American public saw the Muslim ban as quite discriminatory, so much so that one of the first actions of the Biden administration upon coming to office was to cancel the Muslim ban. So on the one hand, this act currently, this executive order that was just issued by the second Trump administration, relies on a policy that was widely understood to be discriminatory. And then it takes that further by creating certain orders that encourage the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies to also think about exclusion or removal based on ideological positions. And again, these ideological positions are not well defined at all under the order, quite subject to manipulation as a result, and can be used, frankly, by the Trump administration to exclude individuals that the Trump administration doesn't like because it disagrees with their political viewpoints. Again, in my view, an illegitimate basis for removing, excluding, or refusing to allow individuals into this country.
And you believe that at least as a matter of practicality, whatever about the actual terminology used in the executive order, as a practical matter, you believe that is far more likely to target or to exclude Muslims than people who might have I don't know, subversive or otherwise radical beliefs who are non-Muslims?
Well, again, there are various provisions in this order. There are the provisions which are under Section 2 that are specifically mimicking the Muslim ban. So that section asks the Secretary of State, the Secretary of DHS, and other government officials to report to the president in 60 days with a list of countries from whose nationals should be partially or totally excluded from the United States. That, I think, will likely impact at least some of the same countries that we saw under the Muslim ban as implemented by the first Trump administration. I certainly think Iran will be a part of that list. There are other provisions, though, of this executive order. Under Section C, we see the language around excluding or removing individuals who hold ideologies or engage in behaviors that threaten the constitutional rights of Americans, call for, I believe, something like sectarian violence, or promote, support, or aid, quote unquote, foreign terrorist groups, which is not actually defined under this order. That may not necessarily only impact Muslims. That provision, again, I believe is widely understood. I certainly understand it as specifically targeting foreign nationals, most likely foreign students in particular, who are involved in pro-Palestine advocacy in this country.
Well, again, though, I mean, the way you just... Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, and the reason I think that is because over the last year and a half, since protests have really taken off at college campuses across this country, there have been calls by various private and public officials, including the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to deport foreign students who participate in pro-Palestine protests.
Well, you say pro-Palestine protests. I mean, some of these protests were not just pro-Palestinian in character, but were actually in support of terrorist actions undertaken by Hamas. So I think the standpoint of some of the people you're referring to is that if you're, now you have First Amendment rights if you're an American citizen, surely I would not take action or do anything about students or anyone else who's here espousing pro-Hamas views, but if the First Amendment doesn't apply to you because you're here illegally, then the argument is that, well, if you're going to espouse pro-terrorist talking points, you're going to be given the boot for doing that. That is, there is a tremendous desire to do that among many conservatives, certainly.
Well, first of all, the First Amendment applies to anyone that's here. Second of all, I very strongly disagree with your statement about these protests being pro-terrorism. I think that is, in fact, very much a anti-Palestinian, pro-Israel talking point that massively misrepresents and distorts what these protests, particularly on campuses, are calling for. They're calling for the liberation of the Palestinian people. They're calling for freedom. They're calling for the end of apartheid. They're calling for the end of genocide. And they're calling on their universities to stop supporting those actions through various forms of investment. This notion that those protests are somehow advocating for or supporting terrorism are, again, distortions, inflammatory distortions, and frankly, racist and bigoted distortions that aim to delegitimize the valid requests and demands of these students and protesters. Might there be some individuals who engage in inappropriate action or inappropriate statements? Of course. That happens all the time in all sorts of protest movements. But to suggest that the predominant message of this protest movement is a support for terrorism is frankly unbelievable and unsupported by the facts.
Students for Justice in Palestine, the largest activist group organizing on campuses on their behalf, celebrated the events of October 7th as a historic win for the liberation of the Palestinian people. That's not a few fringe group. That's in the materials published by the group itself. Is it not expressing some level of sympathy for terrorist actions to say that what happened on October 7th was good and we want more of it?
National Students for Justice of Palestine is the umbrella organization, so it's its own independent organization. There are hundreds of chapter organizations across U.S. campuses. To impute or to impugn what National Students for Justice in Palestine say to all of their chapters is, again, without more factual evidence, I think unfair and unsupported. Now, what National Students for Justice in Palestine said, they are entitled to say, under the First Amendment, you can, call it or characterize it however you want.
Well, I'm just saying you characterize it as not support for terrorism. I'm reading from the document. We witnessed a historic win for the Palestinian resistance. That's referring to the events of October 7th.
Unfair and unsupported. And it's more than just National Students for Justice in Palestine involved. Jewish Voices for Peace, all sorts of other organizations unaffiliated with National Students for Justice in Palestine are also involved in the protest movement.
All right, Trump has won, and we don't have to countenance support for terrorism anymore. But Niall, do you have?
Nor are we.
Well, as you may know, Maryam, we have a diversity of viewpoints here, and so I am broadly sympathetic to the view that the charge of backing terrorism has been weaponized to slur pro-Palestinian protests or people who were rightfully, in my view, outraged by the killing of more than 40,000 people and the United States backing for that killing. Having said that, I mean, I think that Robby was making a point about specific instances which I would not defend, where people were endorsing the events of October 7th. That to this point, in a way, I think getting back to the executive order, one of your concerns about this is the breadth of the language. And I'm looking at the executive order here, and it talks about protecting America from people who, and I quote, espouse hateful ideology, or later bear hostile attitudes toward America's citizens, culture, government, or institutions. That seems to me a very, very broad net that could be defined by a government in almost any way it wishes.
Absolutely. This is, that charge is incredibly broad, very subject to interpretation and manipulation. If people are concerned about the Trump administration and its political ideology, I would be similarly concerned about political litmus tests that that administration decides to set out, whether they are for foreign nationals or anyone else. And again, this order doesn't just apply to people who are not currently in the country, who do not enjoy the protections of the Constitution. It would also apply to people who are in this country. And, it's hard to say what would happen given the current makeup of the Supreme Court, but, it would seem that at least the way the charge this order has created for the executive branch potentially leads us down the road where individuals, at least foreign nationals in this country who become swept up in this language, could potentially bring First Amendment claims, obviously depending upon the circumstances, in order to defeat an effort to have them removed because of their quote unquote political ideology, whatever that might be.
Maryam Jamshidi of the Quincy Institute, thanks for joining us. Spirited discussion. Come back soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Even some Democrats are ripping former President Joe Biden for his last-minute decision to pardon his family members.
Here's former President Barack Obama's spokesman and Pod Save America host Tommy Vietor on Jesse Waters last night.
Let's talk about the pardons for a minute. Sure. I think Joe Biden's decision to pardon his family sends a terrible message to the world. I think the presidential pardon power is far too expansive. I would love to see Congress come together and pass a constitutional amendment that says you cannot pardon yourself, you can't pardon your family, you can't pardon your staff. I think all your listeners would support that.
David Axelrod, a former chief strategist to Barack Obama's presidential campaigns, also shared his views on his Hacks on Tap podcast.
Well, we've pounded the Biden shit to death.
Yeah.
But that was egregious. 10 minutes before the inauguration, they announced that he's pardoned members of his family. I mean, man up. You know what I mean? Man up. And if you're going to do it. But don't do it literally as you have one foot out the door, so you don't have to explain it or be accountable for it. And what they did was they gave Trump a gift because it fuzzied up the story, the J6 story.
Speaker Mike Johnson had this to say about Biden's pardons yesterday.
It was shocking. I mean, it was shocking what President Biden did on the way out, pardoning his family for more than a decade of whatever activity, any nonviolent offenses. It was breathtaking to us. I don't think that's anything like that's ever been anticipated. And by the way, go look at the tape, 4 years ago, when it was just implied that President Trump might do something similar. They were apoplectic. Joe Biden himself, Adam Schiff, Chuck Schumer, roll the tape. They all said that would be crazy and unconscionable. And now they're cheering it along. To us, it is disgusting. To us, it probably proves the point, the suspicion that, they call it the Biden crime family. If they weren't the crime family, why do they need pardons, right? Look, there's a lot of attention that's going to be paid to this, and I think that is appropriate, and we will be looking at it as well.
Yeah, this decision coming in for well-deserved criticism. You've criticized it as well. I'm not surprised to hear Democratic or mainstream pundit people calling it into question. As Speaker Johnson said there, yes, you can play the tape of numerous CNN and MSNBC figures condemning the mere suggestion that Trump might do that. So if they have any credibility, obviously have to criticize it when Biden actually does do that. To David Axelrod's point about it being done in like the last few minutes, that adds a flair of drama that it was done then, but it would have been the same thing if it was done weeks in advance with plenty of decision to react to it. So I don't know that really, it doesn't change the fundamental dynamics of it, except I guess shielding Biden from additional press scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, I agree it doesn't change the fundamental point. I think that Axelrod's argument is that it seems a little cowardly, or as if you're trying to avoid the criticism for your actions. Obviously he was not going to do it before the election because that would have created its own firestorm. I do want, in passing, Robby, to praise Tommy Vietor for going on with Jesse Waters.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that.
Yeah.
That's great. I wish there was more of that in cable news. I always tout the couple Democratic political figures who are happy to go on Fox from time to time. Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, I think Amy Klobuchar has done it, and some others. And then obviously people like John Fetterman, who are increasingly on on friendly terms with conservatives in general, but figures who aren't like that but will wander into those media spaces, I think is good, and vice versa. Right. Republicans who do that in unfriendlier media spaces. So yes, I very much agree with you.
And on the point of double standards and so forth, I can't really let Speaker Johnson's remarks go by without a reminder that he has formed the view that Trump's January the 6th pardons are not something that he wants to second guess, while he seems to have no difficulty at all second guessing President Biden's pardons and describing them in the way that we just showed there. So I think, for Johnson, there's obviously no political liability at all in going after Joe Biden. There would be liability in criticizing President Trump, and so he has chosen not to.
I also don't agree with the argument Johnson made there, and it's an argument that all of the Democrats made when they were condemning the theoretical Trump family pardon, saying, why would you pardon if you committed no crime or had nothing to hide? And then Mike Johnson just said that too. Actually, I think that's wrong in all circumstances, because that's Patriot Act type stuff. Why do you want your privacy if you have nothing to hide? That's the wrong way to go about it. I don't want maybe you to search me because I protect my bodily autonomy and don't think you have the right, dude.
Yeah.
And also because there are, and now both sides agree to this, they just disagree on which case qualifies, unfair or biased or politically motivated investigations of people and their families do occur, because you can, and this is what people don't understand, there's so many laws on the books, you can always find some reason to investigate. So if you're a law enforcement figure or a political figure with chairing a House committee, you can always look in, you can always find something, and then even if you don't get the thing that you're investigating for, you can say, well, they obstructed justice or they perjured, but then when we interviewed them about it, they said some information that was not actually true because they were stupid and didn't decline to talk to us and instead consult a lawyer. This is what happened to Michael Flynn, who I'm sure you think is a reprehensible person.
I do think he's a reprehensible
person. But he got called in
to
answer questions. He didn't know he was under any kind of criminal investigation. I mean, they got him on perjury. He answered questions. I mean, this happens to low-level people too, right?
Yeah, but Flynn's perjury was not, as I recall, about a minor matter. He denied making a phone call that he had in fact made. Is that not the case to a Russian government
Right,
official?
but the point being, if he just not said anything, he would not have. He wasn't charged with making the phone call. He was charged with not telling investigators about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think his defense was, I forgot I made that call, or as people do in lengthy interrogations with police officers, you misspeak. That can be it. That can be the entire basis of a criminal conviction. Even strip it down from a political standpoint. I mean, people get convicted. People admit to guilt in serious criminal matters under police interrogation because they're so grueling and last so long.
Yeah.
You should never, and this is just inner libertarian me talking, never agree to be questioned by, never answer questions of law enforcement in any context ever. If you have some important information that you want to convey to law enforcement because you're trying to be a good citizen, you know something they should know, you can inform them vis-a-vis mediation through an attorney. You tell an attorney and you have them relay that information in a way that is not so that you don't bring on liability yourself. That's just good advice to everyone.
If I can go from your high-minded point to a low-minded one, it always irks me when I'm watching true crime shows and the cops say, so-and-so who we brought in, oh, well, he asked for a lawyer, so we knew. Why would he do such a thing?
It's awful. And they kick over a door and like, this is going to get way worse for you unless you tell me what you want right now. And then they say, okay, I'll tell you. No.
Yeah.
You say, Bring in my lawyer and we'll structure some kind of deal.
Exactly.
Every time. Call an attorney. Call an attorney.
Citizens' advice here on Rising this morning. Good advice, though.
We've got a lot more to talk about. Stay tuned. A major victory for Prince Harry. The Duke of Sussex settled his invasion of privacy lawsuit against Rupert Murdoch's news group newspapers. The tabloid's unprecedented apology ends a painful chapter in Harry's life, who was hell-bent on exposing the publisher's wrongdoing from 1996 to 2011. His claims included phone hacking, surveillance, and misuse of private information by journalists and private investigators instructed by them at the News of the World, the news group's now defunct paper.
Harry's lawyer, David Sherborne, called it a monumental victory outside of court. Let's watch.
Today's result has been achieved only through the sheer resilience of Prince Harry and Tom Watson, whose willingness to take newsgroup newspapers to trial has led directly to this historic admission of unlawfulness at the Sun. It has only been by taking newsgroup not just to the steps of court, but inside the courtroom itself, that these claimants have finally managed to extract this historic admission of guilt.
Regular Rising viewers know that my interest in and knowledge of the goings-on of the British royal family is zero. I am with the American founders who rebelled against the need to pay attention to this at all.
Excellent.
So I have no idea what's happening here. Why don't you fill me in, Niall Stanage?
I will fill you in a second before, or after rather, pointing out that I myself as a proud Irish person have very limited affection for the British royal family, but they do hit the news all the time. What is happening here is Prince Harry took this case against the Murdoch newspapers for invasion of privacy, and it was part of a much longer standing story about the use of phone hacking in particular, not just against Harry or the royal family, against many, many figures in public life. And this created a scandal for the Murdoch newspapers. The significance here is twofold. One is that the vast majority of previous plaintiffs had settled their cases, so the only people left standing were Prince Harry and the other person his lawyer alluded to, Tom Watson, who was a member of the British Labour Party. Former MP, I don't believe he's still in Parliament. The point here also is, for British media watchers, that the wrongdoing was admitted on behalf of the Sun newspaper, which is still in existence. Previously, accusations of phone hacking and so forth had led to the closure of another Murdoch Sunday tabloid, the News of the World, and the closure of the News of the World was intended to sort of cordon off the contamination from these acts. Now that has been, that cordon of sanitation has been broken down. It is a big victory for Prince Harry. There has been an acknowledgement also of the invasion of privacy of his late mother, Princess Diana's life, and the effects that had not just on her, but on Harry and presumably Prince William also. So that's basically the short version is Prince Harry defeats Rupert Murdoch, even though it's officially a settlement. It's a victory for Harry.
Yeah, look, I am of several minds in that I want people to be able to enjoy their privacy, even if they're, important public eye type figures. I think Harry and Meghan Markle often themselves try to have it both ways and be like, no, we just want our privacy respected, but also we want to be these celebrity figures. They just want positive publicity, but you can't control what kind of publicity you get. And if you're entertainment and cultural figures, and if people don't like you, that's sorry, that's just how it works out. Obviously, everyone has the right to not be illegally spied on in a kind of... I've heard about this story, obviously, over the years. I know so little about the details of it. How were the phones hacked? Who did... I can't imagine... Did journalists put little bugs on the... What happened?
So if I am recalling the details correctly, what happened was that people posed as people who they were not to get phone records. Now, I think there was employment of private investigators who did hack phones by, I guess, calling up the phone provider and saying, I've forgotten my PIN or whatever. Now, you would think that would raise some alarm bells if it was Prince Harry or whatever, but they appear to have got into these kind of records or been able to record phone calls. There's also a whole separate controversy about Piers Morgan, who denies personal involvement in all this, although he was certainly around the British tabloid newspaper scene at the time.
Yes, Piers Morgan has become one of the most interesting commentators around right now. The show he has, which features a lot of guests and hosts we've had on Rising and kind of just personalities in the YouTube ecosystem, is very, very interesting. That is what I know him for, being associated with that. This is an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It's not an acknowledgement, like, who made was it the editors at the paper who said, yeah, this would be a good idea, or somebody just did it and then they covered? I can't imagine Rupert Murdoch ordered them to do this.
There was
so unusual.
There was a culture. I mean, first of all, I think we should say the British tabloid world.
It's hard to understand from the American perspective.
It's hard to understand, and it's
like
very different. I mean, the ethics and mores of the British tabloid world are very different from the more reputable sectors.
The closest thing we had to this was like Gawker.
Right.
Publishing, sex tapes of celebrities, publishing just vile revenge porn type things that were sent into them. I'm a pretty free speech maximalist, but the stuff they were doing was just so utterly reprehensible. And then they ultimately got sued out of existence by Hulk Hogan being bankrolled by Peter Thiel for revenge, which has an unseemly dimension to it. But the wrongdoing, in my view, on their part was just so vast that I don't think any jury in the country would have acquitted them. It was so bad.
Right, and in the British tabloid culture, a lot of this stuff is pretty prurient things about people's sex lives and sleeping with people who they shouldn't be sleeping with and all of that kind of thing. And so obviously if you can hack into someone's phone, or if you get their phone records under false pretenses, that is an effective but morally reprehensible way of doing it. It is that has ignited the whole scandal, which has been going on for many, many years. I noticed that the Murdoch Group has spent more than £1 billion British pounds in either legal costs or settling these cases. So it has been a massive and long-lasting saga.
The British tabloid kind of ecosystem is interesting because also, though, British, well, tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is Britain has much stricter libel and defamation laws than we do here in the United States. So it's easier for celebrities, entertainment figures to sue you for negative coverage there than it is here.
It is, and one of the things that is an odd side benefit of that, which I regret doesn't happen in America, is that there are all these coded phrases in Britain that are used to imply something else, and so you need to know the codes to understand what has really been alleged sometimes, and it circumvents.
It's like when they, on social media, TikTok, but all social media, they use other terms to because that term, they say corn now instead of porn. They say
exactly.
The COVID pandemic was the Backstreet Boys reunion tour or the Panda Express.
Yes.
Love that.
There's a satirical magazine in Britain called Private Eye. There's no real exact analogue to it here, but the closest is probably The Onion. And so they have this whole panoply of phrases, including the suggestion of someone being drunk in public. They are always described as tired and emotional, which is the general idea of all of that.
Yeah, the kids on social media always say unalived instead of death or suicide. Exactly. Unalived. More to talk about on Rising today. Please stay with us. 22 states are now suing the government over President Trump's decision to end birthright citizenship.
Birthright citizenship is the idea that children born in America whose parents are undocumented immigrants automatically gain citizenship.
Birthright citizenship defenders tend to point to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution.
The specific clause often cited within that amendment reads, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside." Senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Amy Swearer, however, disagrees with the notion entirely.
Swearer, in the abstract of her 75-page paper on the topic, writes, while it is indeed clear that the Constitution recognizes that citizenship is the birthright of certain U.S.-born individuals, both textualist and originalist analyses of the Citizenship Clause substantially undermine assertions that birthright citizenship must be applied universally to all persons born on U.S. soil, regardless of the immigration status of their parents. Joining us now to dive deeper into her point of view is Amy Swearer. Amy, welcome to Rising.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So why don't you elaborate on your argument? For years we've heard that it's pretty unambiguous that that even if you've come to the country illegally, if you give birth here, your children are American citizens from birth. But you say it's more complicated than that. Can you explain why?
Absolutely. So I'm fully aware that many Americans today, and in fact, probably most legal scholars, simply assume that we have what I'd refer to as universal birthright citizenship, that we follow sort of the Old English common law that universally grants citizenship to anyone born in this country under any circumstances, except for maybe the children of like foreign ministers, foreign ambassadors, etc. But the reality is, when you look at the original public meaning of the 14th Amendment, when you look at what these words meant to the people who drafted and ratified that amendment to the Constitution, they were very clear. While they were trying, of course, to override the Dred Scott decision and make citizens of the newly freed slaves, that the Supreme Court in Dred Scott said they're not citizens, they can never be citizens, even though they owe their allegiance nowhere else, Congress was absolutely trying to make citizens of them and to eliminate permanent racial barriers to citizenship. But they were also explicitly trying to exclude certain classes of people, not based on race, but based on their lack of total, complete political allegiance to the United States that didn't put them in anywhere near similar footing to those newly freed slaves who owed their allegiance nowhere else.
But Amy, I want to get on to another case on the legal point of this, and I know you're aware of it because you allude to it in one of the pieces that I read, which you wrote. An 1898 Supreme Court case, which I'm sure our audience will be delighted to plunge into, but it's the US versus Wong Kim Ark. And to explain that briefly, this is about a 21-year-old person who had been born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrant parents. And his parents at the time, by virtue of being Chinese, there were a lot of restrictionist laws and they could not become citizens. He left the country and was not allowed back in because they said he wasn't a citizen. And he took that case to the Supreme Court. Now, before I go on to describe the judgment, is that basically an accurate summation of the underlying case?
Yeah, that is exactly what happened to Wong Kim Ark, yes.
So then, when it comes to the Supreme Court, they rule in his favour by a 6-2 majority. And Justice Horace Gray, for the majority, writes that the case, and I quote, affirms the ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the territory. And he then goes on to say that the 14th Amendment is declaratory in form and enabling and extending in effect. So, I mean, that seems pretty clear to me. You obviously don't think that that applies in this case, but the language seems fairly clear. So what is your argument to counter that?
So if that were the only language in that opinion, I'd probably agree with you. But the reality is that opinion doesn't actually follow in its own practice what the common law analysis would have been. So at common law, that analysis from that court would have been very simple. It would have been Wong Kim Ark was born here. He is not the child of an ambassador or any sort of legally accredited foreign national. Therefore, he is a citizen. Instead, the court very narrowly holds and repeatedly emphasizes the lawful permanent residency of Wong Kim Ark's parents. That is irrelevant to anything under the Old English common law. And so actually my thesis within the article that you mentioned is that what the court is doing is sort of recognizing an Americanized version of that common law. And I think to that extent, that limited holding that the US-born children of permanently domiciled, lawfully present aliens, what we would today consider lawful permanent residents, that they are U.S. citizens, I think that's perfectly consistent with, one, what the original public meaning of the 14th Amendment was, but also with this idea of this Americanized jus soli, this Americanized birthright citizenship, which is not nearly as broad as the Old English common law. And you see this even in a Yale Law Review article from that same year commenting on this case, where it recognizes that unlike the Old English common law, where even being a temporary sojourner was was enough for the child of that person to be considered a citizen of that nation. The American common law doesn't allow for that. That permanent domicile, permanent residency is what makes that U.S.-born child a citizen. And so even after this case, you see scholars understanding that whatever the court is doing here, it is not embracing the full extent of English common law. To the extent it is embracing common law, it is an Americanized version of that. And I think that's perfectly consistent with both the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and also the original public meaning of the 14th Amendment.
So this executive order is going to get litigated. Immigration rights groups are suing to stop it. What would end up being the legal status of, so would this would render as not citizens anymore people, would this be backward as well as going forward?
So my understanding of the executive order is that it is only prospective. And I think that's a good thing, legally speaking. I think if you start looking at stripping citizenship from people who have already relied on that, who the United States has already said in good faith, we're considering you citizens, you start running into reliance issues. But this only looks prospectively for children born after a certain date. I believe that date is the end of February of this year. So it is prospective. The legal status would be after that the U.S. would not consider those children to be U.S. citizens. That said, almost never would that leave a child stateless. I know that this is an argument that has been put forward by critics of this executive order, but the reality is that almost always you are going to have that child either automatically qualify for or have automatically bestowed on them the citizenship of the nation of origin of their parents. In fact, I've not seen yet presented a single instance in which that wouldn't be the case, where you could, by some technicality of law and the fact of birth on U.S. soil, have an individual who just acquires citizenship nowhere if we don't consider them U.S. citizens. So I'm not sure that criticism is actually something that could even plausibly come to fruition.
Thank you so much for joining us today to discuss. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
How the mighty have fallen. It appears as though CNN is looking to repair its thorny relationship with President Trump. CEO Mark Thompson is telling staffers and on-air talent to forget the past and look to the future. According to a newsletter written by Oliver Darcy, an independent now commentator who used to work at CNN, Thompson made it clear that he did not want the coverage to relitigate the past. In other words, the CNN chief signaled he did not wish to see the network's focus on Trump's record as a convicted felon or the fact that he exited office as a twice impeached and disgraced president.
This comes at a time when Thompson reportedly will be laying off hundreds of employees, and major Trump critic Jim Acosta is being moved to anchor overnights. Acosta has had an antagonistic relationship with Trump, often participating in testy exchanges with him. He was also once banned from the briefing room by Trump's administration during his first term. And some ex-users are outraged because of the shake-up. Fred Guttenberg, whose daughter was murdered in the Parkland High School shooting, had this to say: "I will never watch CNN again. I will never do an interview there again. This is an effort to submit to Trump by removing Acosta. It is unacceptable. If I want to watch Fox, that's what I will watch. If I want to watch real news and not Trump propaganda, I have other options." Former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen agreed with Guttenberg, writing, quote, "I join you, Fred Guttenberg, in your sentiment and disgust with CNN and their treatment of Acosta. Hashtag bend the knee."
Well, okay, but look, let's be clear about what's happening here. Oliver Darcy was a reporter for CNN, media reporter. He's now on his own, publishing on Substack or some other platform. So he's the guy, if you're at CNN and you're ticked off about the way things are going and you want to leak something counter to the managers or the people in charge, you go to him. People griping about their workplace is on one level what this is. I'm sure there's a little bit of let's not egregiously attack Trump because it's just not working in terms of building a audience. If we don't have to hear, I kind of agree. I don't agree that the network should try to limit its talent's criticisms of Trump, but also do we need so much backward-looking coverage of things that have already been litigated is just, I think, kind of boring. So what do you...
I'm not sure that is the argument that Mark Thompson is making.
Well, I don't know what the argument Mark Thompson is making. I know what the argument people who are pissed off about it are making to Oliver Darcy to make to us.
Right, which is, I mean, and they have the right to present their version, and if Mark Thompson wants to come on to Rising or elsewhere to defend his position, that's fine. The point is, I think, it is an obvious and legitimate journalistic function to talk about what the second person in history to win non-consecutive terms did during his previous term or during the interim when President Biden was in and Trump was out. And so the apparent or reported declaration of that stuff as off limits or semi-off limits, it seems to be an abrogation of journalistic responsibility and basic journalistic integrity.
Yeah, I guess it's...
You're not very enthusiastic in your "I guess" there, Robby.
Well, no, I don't like, as a journalist who works for multiple media companies, I don't like to be told what I can and can't cover either, and so I have a little bit of industry solidarity with those people. But of course, these are businesses at the end of the day. CNN is a business. It's a failing business. It's a business that's had to lay off a number of people, and they can't attract an audience.
I know, but I don't want to be gleeful about that because I know. I mean, whatever.
I'm not being gleeful.
Right. Okay. I just don't like hundreds of people.
I'm not gleeful about anyone losing their jobs, even people I don't like. It's not good. And there are plenty of people I do like at CNN. Even Brian Stelter, who just got brought back and has been a serial punching bag of hours on this program. He's had me on reliable sources a couple times, which I appreciate. And if they want to have me on again, I'll happily go on and share my increasingly pro-Trump views.
Well, maybe they'll be more welcome than ever now.
Maybe they'll be more welcome than ever. Regime. I love Scott Jennings. Worship Scott Jennings.
I know you do.
Scott Jennings.
Big fan.
Great. So, they're trying. I would, if I was advising them, I would tell them not to stop the journalists they have from covering subjects they want to talk about with respect to Trump, but bring on other people. Instead of canceling, instead of censoring or saying no, say, well, what is some other perspective we can bring in to hear from that is counter to that or is different from that? That is the way I would deal with it. I would, if their view is that the program is to monomaniacally focused on the sins of Trump or the past sins of Trump, well then don't turn that off, but dilute it by bringing in other interesting things. Does that make sense?
No, I agree. And one of our points of agreement is that it is beneficial to have different points of view represented and to have some kind of genuine argument or genuine debate about those views. I think that the problem here is the suggestion that there are things that are just beyond the pale or outside of the accepted limits of discourse or debate or coverage, which in my mind they clearly should not be outside of those limits.
Acosta, we barely knew you, but you're off to the later hours of the day. That does it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. I will be off tomorrow, as I usually am on Fridays, but Niall is putting in a full week's work. He'll be here with Amber Duke. Stay tuned.